1, 2, 3. Good afternoon. My name is Edgar Perez. We're here with Fusion 360. Today we're going to be talking about SureSet Apex, one of our key products. Very unique product that has performed very well over the years, and we want to cover some of the details about it. So SureSet Apex was created with some concerns that we had. So the concerns were insufficient crop setting is leading to minimal yields, abortion of seed, bee colony collapse, and increase in demand is causing a rise in beehive fees, minimal bee activity, and low supply of bees and high demand. So we'd like to cover these topics and kind of how we came up with this product to help solve some of these issues. Some of the topics we're going to cover is pollination and its components, pollen tube formation, crop abortion, isoosmotic pressure and its importance, a lot amount of pollination period, increasing bee activity and health, sufficient energy for the set crop to the years, and application of the SureSet product. So bee health, it's very important in tree crops or any type of crop that needs to be pollinated that you have adequate bee or pollinator activity. Beehives sometimes come out to the field in very poor conditions. They're transported from other states, cold states. Bees probably didn't have enough food during the cold season, so they tend to have a weak colony, and they tend not to work so much. So one thing that we found that SureSet can do is increase the bees' activity in many ways. One way that it helps is that it's rich in and it's a complex food source for bees. It has a key ingredients that help with bees' metabolic activity, and it helps them work at a higher efficiency. We've tested the product in cold periods, even in the almond bloom period when we still get some frost and temperatures below 32 degrees. And we found that by applying these to the beehives, we can get the bees to work at a higher body temperature. And they'd come out at even at a below 45 degree temperature. They'll come out and work and help pollinate. It also allows bees to withstand toxic pesticides and ward off pathogens and predators. So we've also tested this in hives where there might be some varroa mite or other type of predator or pathogen, and we have found that it helps minimize the incidence of these predators and diseases. So that's one way that Fusion SureSet can help. Another thing that's unique about Fusion SureSet is that it helps with what we call erasing the bee's memory. Not that it erases the bee's memory, but it helps with targeting the bees where to work. So by applying this material in orchards or fields where they might not have gone because maybe the crop they're trying to pollinate is not as appealing as another type of forage or other type of blooming product or blooming flower out in the field, they would tend to come to this bloom as opposed to another one. So when we apply this in the field, bees are very smart. They communicate very well. They will taste it. They get us taste of the food source or the SureSet, and then they communicate with the bees, and at that point they basically put a plan, and they will come back, and they keep coming back to this field as opposed to other fields that were not applied with SureSet. So that's what we mean by erasing the bee's memory. Pollination. So most crops are self-pollinating, but they still require some form of pollination to get a better set, or avoiding also doubles, maybe on almonds, getting double nuts in a crop. So pollination is very important. Permanent crops require sufficient carbon and energy in storage organs, such as the roots, in order to have a proper spring flush. So this starts during the fall when we're talking about trees. If we didn't have proper energy supplied right around post-harvest, then sometimes you might be coming into a pollination period where even if you apply SureSet, you're not going to get the results you want, because the buds won't form properly, and then even if the bee pollinates it, it's not going to properly cross-pollinate. So that's something to keep in mind as well when we're thinking about making a SureSet application. We want to have a healthy, vigorous crop that's going to be able to withstand a heavy load and be prepared to have a heavy amount of bee activity occur, so it can hold the crop. And then also during pollination, ideal weather is important. SureSet's going to help with bees working at lower temperatures, but it's still important for the bud to set and to pollinate to have, or for the pollen tube to germinate to have adequate temperatures and activity of cross-pollination. This is illustration of basically what happens if you don't have sufficient energy. So ideally what would happen is when a pollen tube is when a pollen grain is on top of the pistil, it's going to have to germinate and make its way down to the ovary. And this is what this is showing. It's showing the pollen grain being set on the pistil, and it's going to germinate down. When you have adequate amounts of calcium and boron, which is one of the unique parts of SureSet, there's a well-balanced form of calcium and boron also present in the mix, you'd get an adequate pollen tube germination that will make its way down to the ovary and get proper pollen tube germination. What are some of the requirements? Pollen grains must be able to germinate on the pistil in order to form the pollen tube. Pollen from the same tree can also be effective to cross-pollinate. And flowering pollen tube formation ovary will be fertilized depending on proper pollen tube formation. So what are some of the things we like? What are some of the pros and cons with a weak tree and a healthy tree? Usually a healthy tree, when I think of a healthy tree, is a tree that was properly fertilized and had adequate amount of nitrogen post-harvest and had a balance of cations and also a carbon source. So the tree would continue to photosynthesize and have enough energy for the big push during the spring. So healthy trees will tend to accept pollen germination much better, have better tube formation and better fruit set, as opposed to a weak tree that would have poor pollen germination, tube formation, and fruit set. So when we're pollinating and we're applying some of these pollens, we also want to make sure that there is it's good viable pollen. And when you're purchasing pollen, you want to make sure that you talk to your source and made sure that they did a test ahead of time that the pollen grains are viable and have maybe something higher than a 95% viability, as opposed to something that won't germinate. This is an example. These are pollen tubes that are not healthy, will germinate and just give off a small crooked pollen tube, as opposed to a healthy pollen that's virus free that will give you a better result when you apply it with SureSet. So pollen quality is important for germination percentage and strength. And also you want to make sure that you test for different viruses beforehand when you apply the pollen with the SureSet. Typical viruses are Prunus necrotic ring spot virus, for example, and many other viruses are important to test beforehand. So here's an illustration of basically what happens when you don't have proper energy and storage post-harvest. You get what we call an imperfectly formed pistil. So instead of having a fully formed pistil that happens when you have proper nutrition in place, a balanced nutrition. It's going to help create more of these reproductive structures. When you don't have certain key elements or an imbalance in the plant, you get structures that aren't properly formed. So even though it looks like there's a bloom, sometimes they won't set because it didn't have enough time or energy to form properly. And once you get into bloom time, it might seem like a bumper bloom, but it might not set, and that's when you start seeing drop or major drop during the June period of maybe an almond crop, or even on some of these other tomatoes that might have like a blossom end rot or improperly formed fruit. So as I mentioned, stored energy is very important when we're looking at SureSet applications. You have to have the previous year you had to have enough carbon and energy supplied to the flower for the demand. When we're thinking of bloom, it's probably one of the more stressful times in any crop's life. It's basically pushing all its energy to form the crop and set the crop. So if there's not enough energy beforehand to supplement it, even applying SureSet's not really gonna increase your odds on setting the crop. Best thing to do is make sure that the year before, on a perennial crop or on an annual crop ahead of time, within a month or maybe a month ahead of time, you have enough energy for when it comes to that reproductive period of the crop. So what are some of the ways you can help have enough energy for the next push? Is having proper ratios of nutrition will lead to a maximum nutrient uptake. Increase photosynthetic harvest by way of foliar nutrients and complex mixtures of catalysts and macronutrients. And soil condition in order to make way for new roots and other storage organs. So we have other products at Fusion, like our Fusion foliar line and our soil applied products that help with this issue. If you have a weak orchard that you're looking to turn around, it's important to implement some of the foliars and some of the soil applied products to help for the following season. So another key benefit to SureSet is that it helps increase the isoosmotic pressure of the cell. So that's one of the reasons why we apply it as a dry material. We've tried doing it in a liquid form, but we've always had best results by applying it dry. Anywhere from a 3 to 5 pound per acre application will help create what we're looking here, which is basically when you apply this material, which is a solid, and you coat it on the blossom of any type of crop. It could be a almond or a pistachio or even an annual crop. It'll help create a higher solute content on the outside of the blossom, which would help prevent basically the flaccidity of a cell. So for example, when you have a rain period during bloom and you start getting brown rot, that's typically a sign that you had weak cells or maybe a high nitrogen rich type of blossom. Whereas if you add some of these key solutes like potassium, sodium, calcium, and phosphorus on the outside of the cell, it helps create a higher pressure and prevent it from rotting or destroying itself and causing basically pathogens to be able to come in and intrude on it. So the cell membrane structure is very important, kind of like what I just covered with the turgidity and the isoosmotic pressure. When you have proper calcium and boron in place beforehand, you have a stronger cell wall that's going to help increase set, prevent disease. It's also going to help with the pollen tube germination, which is probably the most important part during this period in order to get a good cross-pollination and a proper set. So what are some of the ways that you can apply SureSet to help with some of the key benefits we just mentioned? Is we've applied it through aircraft, fixed wing, ground dusters, and ATV equipped with a custom blower. So we've applied it in many scenarios on hilly ground, muddy ground. We've applied it during wet periods, but the best time to do it is to apply it around 25 to 50% bloom on the first application, and another one at 75% bloom on any type of crop. And we have found that it helps attract the bees. It helps get the bees to work much harder, so you get a better bang for your buck on the beehives you paid for. And also you get a chance to put out some extra pollen with the SureSet that's going to help with the cross pollination. So these are some of the different methods. It's unique because it's dry, but there's definitely a big benefit to applying it as a dry material as opposed to a liquid material. Typical rates go from 1 to 5 pounds of SureSet per acre. It can be on nuts or any type of crop. 2 recommended applications is important. Best to split it because there's different stages where the plant is setting and giving off a lot of its energy, so it's good to stagger your SureSet application so you can make sure you take advantage of the full bloom as opposed to just one portion of the bloom. So these are some of the different application methods. If any questions, you can always call the Fusion reps, and they have a lot of experience with applications, so they could help guide you in that sense. Thank you, and if any questions, feel free to contact Fusion 360.